All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming back from lunch. I think we all had a very busy week. I hope for the best. So I'll be your moderator for this afternoon's panel discussion. I'm Thomas Vollmer, and I'm the peering manager for Africa and Middle East for Google. And today's topic, or this afternoon's topic, will be the different business models of IXPs, Internet Exchange Points. Working in the regions that I have been working for the past years, I have been lucky enough to interact with Internet Exchange Points at various stages of their development. And I have heard a lot of questions, a lot of interrogations, and a lot of challenges over time that all link back to the same question, which is, what is the value of an IXP to its member, to the internet, and how does the IXP live sustainably and grow sustainably using that value? So at the early stage, it could be questions as simple as, what do I need to start an exchange? How expensive is it? How much hardware do I need? How much money do I need? The answer to that question is pretty easy. It's not much. And we'll have occasion to come back to on this later on during the panel. In the middle level of the life cycle of an exchange, it could be questions like, okay, I have 20 members on my exchange. I'm still struggling to attract the local incumbent or some content player to my exchange. I'm still doing this on my own free time, and nobody's paying to join the exchange, or nobody's a member of the association. How do I grow? How do I take my exchange to the next level, or how do I help interconnection in my country more than I already do? And then at the higher, at the later level of the life cycle of an exchange, in more mature market, you have polemics that have rose this year in similar forums as this one about the price of exchanges. They have been called too expensive. Exchange operators have been criticized by some parties about charging too much for their ports and spending not enough, and spending too much on marketing and not enough on technology. Are those accusations fair? Again, this all links back to what is the value of an exchange to its member? How should it sustain itself? And while I don't have the answer to this question myself, we have today a very good collection of panelists to help give some pointers, if not answer the question altogether. So I would like to introduce my panel members now. So first, starting from my left to right, which is your right to left, Andrew Owens, which is interconnection and peering specialist at Terraco, South Africa. Riaz Bashani, sorry if I said that wrong. Riaz Bashani, the CEO of Angani Limited, a cloud service provider trying to localize as much content within the continent as possible. Riaz has over 15 years of experience building networks in the region. We have Emmanuel Kwarteng, who has been running the Ghana Internet Exchange and is also a director of Broadband Home, bandwidth provider in Ghana. We have Kyle Spencer, the director of the Uganda IXP. We have Mark Tinka, who is the head of engineering at CCOM. And then Andreas Sturm, the head of business development at DKIX since 2009. Andreas is accountable for planning, direction, and marketing of 4 national and 7 international DKIX operations. He's part of the DKIX senior management team, board member of GPF, and secretary of the board of GPF also, and a Pokemon Master level 4 only. Now, before the panelists share some opening remarks and start debating of this question, and we later open the microphone to the floor, I would like to invite Andreas to share some of the conclusions he has gathered from a worldwide survey of the DKIX members on various exchanges. I think those can give us a few pointers to start the discussion. Andreas, please.
So thanks a lot, Thomas, for the warm-up. warm welcome words, and thank you for the FIB organizers to having us here and giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas. Yes, as Thomas said, we did a survey among our member base in Frankfurt, which is relatively big. But at the end of the day, I guess it has the values of an IX that is important for them is as important as it is for all exchanges of all sizes. So the most important value is security of investment. It's the highest rated indicator, and it leads to the future importance of an exchange. So there's a lot of effort and money I put into to get to an exchange. It's legal stuff, it's choosing the right transport network and such. So I want to make sure that I'm signing contracts which have a long running time of 36 to 72 months. I spend it to the right exchange and make it to the right time. So this is this is important for them, and for me as an exchange point operator, I have to make sure that I'm growing constantly, adding constantly networks to the show. It's not the speed of adding 100 networks a year. It's the growth rate that is seeable, visible, and notable to everyone who is looking into my exchange. Network effects come through the size. If I have 10, my network effect is 10 by 10, which is 100. If I have 12, I have my network's effect is 12 by 12, it's 144, so I have 44 points more value to my customer base. The slide's gone, but doesn't matter, okay. And a bit of a disappointing for all engineers in this group, the running of the exchange, operation of the exchange, isn't that important for the continuance to stay or coming to the exchange. Only it gets significantly important if it's not working. Then it's one of the highest values. Next slide, please. Business model for IXs. I don't want to describe which is, if it's a member base, is it mixed, commercial, and so on, because this, from my point of view, doesn't make a difference to work and grow for an exchange. But it needs to be there to have a plan and to have a common understanding how it should be go. The most important thing in the model is to have an individual or a group accountability that makes the IX work, and it's a people's business. And Andrew from Terraco, or from the NAB Africa, better say, pointed this out in our earlier discussion, and I'm happy to hear him saying this again. Free lunch or disruptive approaches aren't sustainable in my point of view. It has its goods for quick wins to make a start, but you have to make a return. You have to get a reward to work sustainable in the long-term run. And the exchange points are long-term projects. Budget, storytelling, accountability, market are important, totally important. And sorry to say, this is kind of commercial, but it needs to be that way because I have to market my exchange. If I don't tell, and this is the last point, act good and make it known. It's a German saying, tue Gutes und rede darüber. If you don't tell, no one knows. And you won't get visibility, you won't get any notability. So this is all about telling the people that you are there, talking to them, and selling your values to the exchange. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Andreas. Now I'd like to open to the panelists for opening remarks, comments on those. Who wants to go first? Mark? Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I think for me, I think what I'd like to get out of this panel is to maybe get an understanding of the evolution of the shift in mindset of African operators about not only enjoying the benefits of the exchange point, but also to appreciate them as we're running businesses across those exchange points, and those exchange points help us profit from our businesses.
So let's be specific, Mark. You are an important African operator. What is the value of an exchange point to you? How do you quantify that?
Well, I mean, for CCOM, 75% of our traffic happens on peering. That for us is significant value. Simple as that.
All right, Kyle?
Right. Thank you. I'll just take a minute to help illustrate our perspective as the Uganda Internet Exchange Point. So we're a private not-for-profit that was launched in 2001 under a free model. There's no fees, largely due to economic pressure because at the time transit costs like $5,000 a meg. So every bit counts. Rent and utilities are nullified by the government because we're in their facility, and otherwise we're reliant on donations for everything else. We've been keen to implement fees for a while, and as we grow, the IXP requires more resources. Utilities, equipment, time is a really big one. And we'll also eventually need to launch a second site, which will require even more resources. But we don't really know what the best model is or how to determine the right price structure. As a small IXP, we have a somewhat limited vantage point, and we're largely blind to the perspective of our customers. So we're hoping to learn from this discussion in a way that can help move us forward, as well as sort of share our viewpoint.
Okay, so from us, from Ghana Internet Exchange, I also like to give a little perspective of how we came about. So we started from an angle of membership exchange. So we have membership of the Internet Service Providers Association, and then we form an exchange. We invited others to join. So because of this, we basically have a flat rate of fees, sort of. So our members basically vary, and for us, value from our members mainly has to do with latency. And so for most of the members, they are thinking about how to reach the other networks behind who are connected to the exchange. And then also the second value for them has to do with content, which has encouraged most of them to peer the exchange.
So, okay, from the start of this discussion, it sounds like Andreas, your business is selling ports. Emmanuel, you're selling subscription fees to become a member of the exchange. Carl, in Uganda, what is preventing you from doing just any of those?
Well, it's a multi-part answer, I guess. One is politics, legacy politics. People are used to getting things for free. So implementing fees is sort of a big step within the community. We're definitely going to have to sort of argue our rationale for having to do so to perhaps skeptical peers. And also, as I mentioned in my introduction, we're not extremely confident yet in what the price should be and how we should structure it in terms of the different, port sizes, etc. So.
All right, let's take maybe another African example. I think we have Riaz from Kenya, Andrew from South Africa. Both of these countries have known successful track record of exchange points. Are there some lessons learned or shared experience you can share there?
All right, so Angani is a cloud services provider. Just to describe ourselves in terms of from the exchange point perspective, we're a content company, so we provide content at the exchange, but we're also relatively small customers, so we also look at what value we can derive from the exchange as well, in terms of additional networks and peers that will come to the exchange. And we face certain challenges, like what we've seen as the business is growing. We're a cloud company, so we're more of a virtual data center, if you may, where we're not just providing content, but we're also consuming content based on the customers that are hosted on our platform. And we're actually finding as we grow more, our transit costs increase a lot more. And we've managed to find service providers like Liquid who facilitate a lot of stuff in terms of giving us more capacity to push content out as opposed to download traffic. And that has helped from that perspective. But as we sit here and that's continuously growing and we need to expand to the African region, some of the questions we ask ourselves being present, on near the Kenyan Internet Exchange Point is, do we use our transit ports, which allow us to push more traffic to the users as well as get traffic? Do we use that to expand across the region? Because it seems to be more favorable than the value, for example, that we're getting from the single exchange points. So those are the type of questions that I think we'd like to understand a bit more through the panel and debate a bit more as well.
Okay, so it sounds like you want to expand, have more reach in the region, but you cannot do that through the Kenya exchange. Why is that?
That's fine because you don't get a lot of regional peers at the exchange, and you also I think what's happening is the content players as well, the CDNs that are coming in etc. have a more operator focus right now, and that makes it challenging for smaller players on the exchange to have that. But largely it's because of number of peers that are available at each of the country exchanges. You don't get a very regional approach.
So it's because it's all Kenya basically.
Yeah.
So all right, does an exchange really need to go and reach outside of this, let's say, local customer base? By any measure, NAP Africa is probably the biggest exchange success to date. Andrew, could you share a little bit on how you run today and what value that you think you provide to your members, to the internet in general, and basically how you are funded? Because I think you're neither charging ports nor subscription fees. So what's your model?
Thanks, Thomas. So everybody knows that NAP Africa was started by Terraco, which is the co-location facility. When we started the co-location, we knew that we needed a way to attract people into the facilities. So we started NAP Africa initially. When we were still inexperienced, we started it as just an attractive thing. So we give away our ports for free. We don't charge cross connection fees to the exchange, and we also don't have any membership fees. And it worked in the beginning from that business point of view, in that the more peers, the more peering, the more interconnection you have in a facility, the more attractive it becomes. But looking, more long term, it started making sense, and what we were seeing was that the more peering that happened, the bigger the market became. And we all understand that everything is moving onto the internet these days, and the question about what value does an IXP bring to its members, and this is basically just growth. I mean, if you make it easy for people to connect, you make it cost effective for people to connect, and the internet grows, it's going to mean more business for everybody, not just people on the internet, but in every industry. A better internet is going to create more business opportunities, and I think that's a very long-term value that an internet exchange gives. So beyond the business side, we took a view to say that NAP Africa, our tagline, our goal is simply the good of the internet, and that is what we are trying to achieve. That is our goal, regardless of the fact that our operations are funded, because we understand that in the long term it's going to be better for everybody. And this discussion has been coming up a lot this week specifically. People have been asking, how do you operate an internet exchange? How many people do you need to operate an exchange? And the reality is it's different in all cases. And Big X was talking about talking about marketing and that sort of thing. I mean, that makes absolute sense to me. You cannot, and one of the comments that was made this week was that an internet exchange point is easy. You just plug somebody in and you can leave them and they'll just sort it out on their own. That's not how it works. We have a business development team. It's a lean team. It's small. We have 3 or 4 people, but you know that is how we've grown. Is by engaging with people, by sitting down with people, even existing members. We spend a lot of time with our existing members, speaking to them about new peering, about new strategies. You know, and it doesn't make sense to not do that. You can't just forget about people. And so yes, I agree on that. And lastly, the other thing that Andreas mentioned as well was an internet exchange is about people. Okay, if you do not have a community behind your IX, it's not going to work, because you are dealing with these people every day. You're expecting these people to trust you every day, and if you do not have that community behind it, it's just going to make it a hell of a lot more difficult.
Look, I think what NAP Africa are doing is great. And as CCOM, we derive a lot of value from that exchange point, and we'll continue to be members of that exchange point. And like I've always said to Andrew and to Michelle, if they were ever to wake up and start to charge, we would be happy to pay a fee because we derive value from that exchange point. And I'm not sure, how long they'll continue to work the way they are under Terraco. More power to them if they can. But if they have to get up one day and say, we will charge a fee, we will be happy to pay that fee because we feel the value from the exchange point is important for our business. And I think what I'm trying to get around here for Africa in general is that we have to appreciate that value we get from the exchange points and stop looking at them as free things that we've all enjoyed since we began deploying them back in the mid-90s.
So it sounds like the value you derive from NAP Africa, and for which you would be happy to pay, but no pressure, you can keep it free, is really from the amount of traffic. You said 75% of your traffic goes out on peering, probably not all on NAP Africa, but a decent size, I guess. This sense of community, of growth. Do you have opposite experience where you see an exchange that doesn't bring you any value, or it's just too expensive and you don't want to pay that because of reason X or Y? Can you share a bit more on that? I think that will enlighten also the panel a little bit. And then go ahead.
Yeah, yes, of course. There's some exchange points that don't always give us the same amount of value as we get from NAP Africa, if you look at the African context. And we have reached out to those exchange points and said, look, we would like to join. We're happy to test drive the exchange point and see what we can get from it. But we have to think about what, your port fees will be in terms of what we will derive value from. And we feel it would be unreasonable to pay this kind of fee that I'll derive a lot of value from, say, from an exchange point in Europe, here in this country, for example. And it's challenging because some of the exchange points are trying to look for ways to increase price, others are trying to look for ways to reduce price, others trying to look for ways to how to start to charge for price, like Carl was saying just now. And it's a learning experience for everybody. But yes, I don't think it's fair to say that every exchange point will give you value. And I think that is the risk that any exchange point trying to grow their business in Africa has to evaluate and say, we might not be aspiring to be a DKIX or an App Africa or a IXP. Where are we in the food chain, and what can we do for our members?
I just continue. We had this discussion earlier. And I think looking to Europe is fine, foresee some developments, but it might not help you to find the right people to join the exchange. It's when we're talking about ecosystems in Europe, it's totally different from the ecosystems down here. So public authorities, tax authorities, insurance companies, banks are part of the daily life when I'm using my phone here, down here. So they need to be on the exchange. And the rest will then follow, because it makes totally sense, because it's more liable and all the benefits of peering kicks in now. So that's why keep a good eye on your home turf, and look on what people are using for services, and then see what kind of network is behind the service, and then go to them and tell them that they need to be there.
I just want to respond to Mark. Well, I just got a text message from Michelle saying that we're going to start charging you tomorrow. Just you. No, look. Look, the reality is, Mark, we've been doing this for 4 years now. We have 220 members, and across our exchanges, we've provisioned 420 odd ports. And in terms of connected capacity, we've got 1.4 terabits of connected capacity to the exchanges. And we don't see that as being a significant cost. The reality is that the way that the world is moving is that the cost for hardware is becoming less and less of an issue, especially for internet exchanges. And so at the end of the day, I mean, everybody kind of has it in the back of their minds that at some stage we may need to charge. It is our goal to never have to charge. But if we were ever forced to charge, it would be at a reasonable cost. It would be something that would allow us to operate efficiently. The point has always been that we need to keep it lean, and we need to keep it agile. I'll just end off on that by saying, currently it's not. It is fine to say that NAP Africa is free. It is, anybody can join, whether you're a customer of the co-location or not. Anybody can join for free. But there is a business model attached to this. It drives co-location growth, and that's the business model. So the question to you is, we are well funded at the moment. So why wouldn't I want to take advantage of that to continue offering free ports for as long as possible?
All right. Hold the thoughts of a reasonable fee, because I think that's a question we want to see answered to some extent. We have a question from the floor, I think.
Hi, Graham Benica from South Africa. This whole theme of the cost of running an exchange, I think, has come up in a number of discussions over the week, and I think we all fundamentally agree that there are costs involved in running the exchanges. There are costs of equipment. There are costs of potentially manpower to do it. And what we've seen, as Andrew says, with business models, different exchanges have chosen different models. We've got exchanges on the continent where the hardware has been donated. There are exchanges on the continent that have purchased and that are funding themselves through grants. There are exchanges on the continent that are the human resources that are operating the exchanges are all volunteer time. Now, it's important as an exchange point community or an exchange point operator to fundamentally understand that this is still a business. A donation of volunteer time, while it might be difficult to quantify in rands and cents, is a resource that is being contributed to the exchange. And while it might not be financial, if that resource dries up, your exchange stops being sustainable. And so although the arguments for being lean are very important, to make sure everything is always free and telling everybody that's the only way to run an exchange leaves you with an exchange that potentially, when someone runs out of volunteer capability, or when a grant from some aid organization dries up, suddenly your exchange dies. So what I wanted to ask about is, does anybody on the panel on the floor know of situations where exchange points are battling or potentially failing because they haven't built themselves a sustainable long-term plan to ensure that the infrastructure is reliable? I mean, Mark was saying how important the infrastructure is to his business. And if an exchange point that Mark is using suddenly fails because of failed sustainability, that's obviously going to have an impact. Do we know of any situations like that?
May I share some thought or knowledge on that? So when we talk about failing of an exchange, it's less the operational side. So as long there's power to the switch, it's all fine. It runs. The thing is, there was an Equinix employee who made a survey on all exchanges he can find and he was interested in. And he found out that a lot of these exchanges are still there, but only there. And they had no importance anymore. And the reason was, and this is our own experience as well, is as long as I do not add a network, and another network to the exchange, it's becoming invisible. And that's the major problem of small exchanges. If they do not find new customers and new ways to be visible, they become invisible. And that's one of the biggest challenges when we start new from an exchange from scratch. To be visible, notable, and have an impact on the community, have an impact on networks. Very difficult to handle.
So, Andreas, DKIX has been explicitly called out for having among the most expensive ports, and a reason that was alleged was the marketing cost. Would you say this is the justification behind those marketing costs? Is that if you don't grow, you die, you tend to be less relevant to your members?
Yes, totally agree. As far, I don't know if it's a true story, but it's a story that I heard of. Coca-Cola once stopped marketing in an important market for half a year, and sales went down dramatically, even if everybody knows the Coca-Cola. So if we would start traveling, getting beers and gears, stop sponsoring things, we wouldn't be invisible, or become not visible anymore. But we would lose track. People would start questioning if it's the right decision to stay, if it's the right decision even to think about joining, because in our environment, there's a lot other options, especially in Europe, to interconnect to. So it's a must-have. It's a must-do, basically.
Right. I just wanted to jump back to Graham's question because I find it very interesting. I would also be interested to know, maybe the exchanges aren't dying necessarily in that sense for the reasons you stated, but I would be keen to know about exchanges that flatlined, essentially, or stagnated as a result of these things, because we have seen exchanges come and go on the continent over time. Our exchange, for example, suffered from this stagnation for a number of years because the sort of willpower to have it, the people behind it kind of dried up in a sense. And so it stagnated for a long time. And when we finally sort of got people back into it, it really started moving again. So if you do encounter this, I think as an exchange, and maybe this isn't true in every scenario, but I think as an exchange, if you do enter these fatigues as you're describing, then you do at least start representing less value to your members. So it's important to move to a sustainable model.
I echo what you're saying. I just also want to point out, Graham, you mentioned that you've seen advocacy for free ports and that being the only way to do peering. And this is one of the most important things to remember, that there is no one business model that works for every single exchange point. And I'll go back to NAP Africa and say that we are able to offer free ports and free cross connects because there is an associated business model behind that. Okay, but that's not going to work everywhere. So the only thing that I can advocate is that looking at an exchange point, running an exchange point, you need to treat it like a business. So it doesn't help trying to work out on the back of a cigarette box how much you think your ports cost. You need to look at the financials. You need to look at projections of what you anticipate you're going to be doing in 3 years. You need to it is a business. You need to run it like that. And based on that analysis, that's how you're going to figure out what you need to charge. And one other thing beyond that as well. Again, we'll go back to the community. Have you engaged your community when you're trying to decide what port costs are? Have you sat down with people and had frank discussions with them? Do they know what? Not you, Frank. I mean, do they know how much time you're putting in? Do they know how much effort you're putting? Do they know what the equipment costs? That's the kind of thing that your membership needs to see. You need to be transparent about this. Because if you went tomorrow and said to your user base, we're charging, it might be a bit of a shock to people. But if you knew that people knew why you needed to charge, and they understood the costs, and they understood the benefit of having marketing, for example, if you can show them that, then it should be a no-brainer.
Question from the floor, I think. Yeah, please step forward. Two questions. So please compete and then stand forward.
Hi, Curtis Linkers on Links. I just want to comment on two things. One thing Andreas said, and I echo this, this notion that somehow the marketing and outreach costs drive port costs, should we just ignore that? I mean, I think our cost of marketing is 4% of total turnover. It's literally noise. It's not what's driving port costs for us. There's other factors. And to the point that was raised on the panel before, to make sure that an IX is sustainable, you need to, and every IX is different, right? And the underlying cost structure is very different if you run one IX in one data center, or if you run a switch in 11 data centers across a very large metro region, or whatever your composition is. It's very hard to compare these cost numbers and size numbers, but they have to be sustainable. And to the point the panel was making, I think that's very important. IXS, in order to grow, actually ensure that people understand and use the transparency to show what the money is being used for, and it's actually used to build and drive this exchange point. Now, if you get that money through cross connects or colo space or port fees, it's probably less relevant, as long as there's some transparency in the how it is actually run and operated. I think that's more important than the actual numbers.
So if we take the example of Links has slashed the prices half, I think last month or 2 months ago. Could you explain the logic behind?
Yeah, it was beginning of this month, a month ago. So we always try to draw, as the exchange grows and we have more revenue, the fixed cost will of course come down as proportion to the ports. We've also announced that we're changing the architecture and the vendor for one of the two lands, which was the major cut, because it reflects the cost structure we see. We will try to drive the cost down, and we're a mutual. We return any surplus to the members, and I'm simply oversimplifying, but our way to return that is by lowering the fees. We have no need to have massive cash deposits. We have no shareholders who demands a return on the equity. So therefore, if we grow, our cost structure goes down, and we try to do this all the time to run this more efficient, we're in a position to lower the fees, and that's what we're seeing. And the cut. So we have actually consecutively since I did the math the other time. I think it's 10 or 11 years in a row we have cut costs. So this is not unique. We've done this year on year, and sometimes mid-year, so 2 times a year, which is what we did this year. And I think most IXPs has done the same. So I think we're not unique in that sense.
All right. So lower cost, lower port fees. I guess that's the rationale. Hey, I have a question maybe for Emmanuel on the panel from Ghana about the adequation between your costs and your port fees or subscription fees in the case of Ghana. Do your subscription fees cover your cost? Do you have a problem for this? How do you tackle that issue? And also, I guess another question is, how do you grow the community as what Andrew, Andreas have indicated as a key driver for the success?
Okay, so in our case, what we've done is that because we started from the membership drive, we try to charge very minimal membership fees, and that minimal membership fees to cover it actually covers our cost, which is mainly we actually hosted at the commercial data center, so it covers the cost of the commercial data center. It also gives us some. We have a secretariat who organizes meetings here and there. We have actually put in a technical committee in place to decide on an increment. They've come out with that increment, but we decided to shelve it because our other primary focus is actually to grow the numbers now. And so to grow the numbers, if we quickly come in with a new pricing, we think that it's not going to help. So we're trying to use the few months ahead of us to grow the numbers. Then after that, we can then go and then, of course, members have agreed on increasing the spots, but we want new members. So we don't want any blocking in that sense.
Question from the floor.
Hi, Marco from Dekix. This is half a question because if I hear this discussion, I would say we hear that there is not a real free of charge exchange between, okay, maybe one here, but some or more or less everybody's exchange is, or all exchanges are funded somehow, even if it's through the data center. So the next question might be, if I think about some presentation, the next question might be, why don't you make the racks cheaper because you cross-finance your exchange and this is not fair and whatever. But this is not the point. The point is that my question is why there is a discussion about price when it comes to the exchange and not a discussion about value. Because the major point is not what is the price of an exchange, the major point is what is the value to connect. And I would love to see more this discussion and hear from content. I think you got a lot of value out of exchanges. What are you donating to exchanges for that? What is your contribution to the community for the exchanges to go to countries where it's not easy to build an exchange and they just do it? So I would love to hear more about these things, about the value we build with exchanges and not about the price, because price will be different all over the world between exchanges. And there is more or less reason, as we heard from Links, and this is true, of course, and this should be transparent, this is all true. But my question is more, what is the value?
Yeah, and you're right, and exactly what Curtis and Graham and Andrew said before is that I think not all exchange points will operate the same business model, and that's fine. The point is, as an exchange point member, are you deriving value from that exchange point? One member's complaint about price might not be the other member's complaint about price. Maybe they're not deriving as much value as the member is. If you don't see the value in the exchange point, it's okay not to get sucked into the peer pressure of peering. If you think you can get more value from a transit provider, then do it. If you don't see value in whatever as a function of input cost into that exchange point, then don't do it. But to the other question is, what are we doing to contribute? We worked with Frank, for example, to bring up the Google global cache in Dar es Salaam as a contribution to the exchange point, to grow it, to give us more value so people can come and pay for other traffic. I think we've done something similar elsewhere. I forget where, but I think I spoke to Kyle, I think at some point about saying, I have a couple of switches that are going to become idle. I'll give them to you so we can bring up some 10G ports so we can get more people onto that exchange point to give us more value. But yes, you're right. Maybe operators and other members need to find a way to contribute, but ultimately the point is, what's the value you are getting? And another way to contribute to that value is to pay for the time and effort and marketing and promotion and so forth that goes into operating that exchange point. I can't expect, Kyle, for example, to suddenly make the IXP a big exchange point without actually compensating him for his time. And if I maintain that mindset that, it's an exchange point, it's supposed to be free while I am deriving profit from it, is unreasonable.
So Marco, just responding to the suggestion about dropping rack prices, I can guarantee you that was never factored into the prices, and it's always one of the things we've always struggled with is that people refuse to believe that we're actually doing something that is good for the internet. And again, I go back to the point that this is a long-term thing, right? This is not about making money now. It's not about making money tomorrow. This is about growing something that will lead to more business in the future. So it's, specifically in my model, is that I don't charge for those cross connects. I don't charge for the hardware. I don't charge for ports or anything like that. But that is, I guess you could call, in a sense, it's sort of altruistic in that that is not subsidized by the co-location business. I mean, we don't add those costs on to anywhere. but the co-location side of the business understands and can track the amount of business that it brings in. So, our rack prices are under what you would see in Europe and the States, and that is how we operate.
Question from Shidi.
Okay. I would like to ask if there is, so now we're talking about value from an exchange. I'd like to ask if there is any best practice document that provides a guide to the structure of an exchange. I understand that all exchanges are different and all exchanges, can't operate in the same way. However, there is the possibility that exchanges within a country can be hijacked literally by a few operators. This is a possibility. And then, yes, we talk about value and you want a lot more people to come to the exchange, but other players in the market see the exchange as a place for just, the few top guys who are controlling the exchange, who are basically controlling traffic flow within the country. So is there a best practice? Is there any best practice guide or document or something that, a layperson or someone on the street can use to drive or challenge the exchange within his country to say, look, this model that we're operating, this structure that we're operating, the governance structure can be changed or improved upon, because for some exchanges, the governance structures are just, they're just too weak and they're not sustainable. They're just not sustainable.
So okay, first of all, where are you speaking from? Can you introduce yourself and your organization?
Okay, my name is Chidi Maiwe, main one. I'm not talking about any particular exchange now, just to be clear. I'm just because we're present in multiple exchanges, but I'm talking about exchanges in Africa. And this is a reality. Whether we like it or not, it's a reality in some regions.
So when you call out an exchange that you think is not successful, not sustainable, what do they tell you? Okay. Can you call it out specifically?
No, you will not. You probably won't get anything specific from me.
When you go to them and you tell them, "Hey guys, your exchange sucks. It doesn't work." What do they answer?
Well, that's not the point. The point is not whether it sucks and it doesn't work. That's not the point. We're talking about creating value, letting the exchange create value for the community and be attractive, an attractive place where you even want banks and just about anybody coming there to pay. Now, if that is going to be the case, then it has to have a structure that people can look at and say, look, I want to go there. It was exciting to listen to, I'm not sure, I think that was the links, the drop in the price of the links and the transparency brought about the fact about transparency. These are some of the things that drive confidence in the market to ensure that people can look at an exchange and say, look, I want to be there, irrespective.
So regarding your question about best practices, I'm aware of at least some work related to the IGF where there's been a best practices document that might include something about structure. But the whole point of that exercise was to deliberately not be too prescriptive. Because as we're discussing up here, the context can vary widely, and what works in one location could be disastrous in another. And so it's so have a look at the document that came out of the IGF Best Practices Forum, and if Jane's in the room, she might be able to speak more to it. But and if you talk to me off list, so to speak, then I'll point you in the right direction.
All right. Did we have another question from the floor? Yeah, Graham or gentleman over there? No. Okay. Yeah, Graham.
Hi, Graham again from South Africa. You mentioned, one of the panelists mentioned that they were charging a single rate as a membership fee of the exchange point. I just wanted to ask if there were any further if we could have a further discussion about that. Something that I've noticed in our market is that when you have a very homogeneous community of ISPs, they're all very similar size. Typically, when they're very small, that can work. But typically, as a market grows, you get larger players and you get smaller players. And at some point you potentially reach a level where you've got large players with 10 or 100 gig ports or something at that scale, and to equally maintain the price to pay for an exchange at 10 and 100 gig levels, you're potentially charging something that becomes a barrier to entry to allow smaller players into the market and into your exchange.
Okay, so basically in our case, what we realized quickly was that we don't have any 10 ports, 10 meg ports. We had 100 meg ports, but we encourage all the peers to get rid of the microwave connections and come by fiber, which they've done. So immediately, because of that, we put everybody on a 1 gig port. So the membership fee that you will pay gives you a 1 gig port. There are a few big telcos who are actually on a 10 gig now. So because they got the need for the 10 gig, that brought about the revision of our nodes to sit down and say, okay, do we have to charge something different for a 10 gig, something different for my 1 gig? Which members have agreed that yes, let's charge. So we have agreed, we looked at look at other exchanges, what they're charging and all that, and came out with something that was good for us. The only thing is that we have not implemented it. So yes, we have a flat rate because it's sort of membership, but we going forward, once we get to the next hurdle after getting the number of members that we want, we would then implement port based on the additional high capacities.
Just to add to this discussion, to illustrate some of our thinking as we're sort of debating internally about how we're going to structure our prices. One of our thoughts is to have something like 100 meg port for free, right? And then charge for larger capacities, because the problem is exactly as you described. We have perhaps the majority of our peers are doing like 10 megs or less, and then we've got a couple giant peers, and they don't derive the same value from the exchange as somebody who's using like a 10 gig port. So for us, it would be also, we're not driven by an ISP association, so we don't have the option to do membership fees like that anyway. But when we implement port fees, it's going to definitely have to be staggered, I think.
So taking a step back and coming back to the question of the value of the IXP to its members or to its owners in some cases. So we saw the value of the community that's attached to the exchange, the value of its continuous growth of the community. We saw also you can evaluate some form of your value with your cost. If you're doing just cost recovery, or if you want to give back your profit essentially to your community again. One other way you can evaluate your value, and is what I typically used as a student when I wanted to give a math class to basically make some money during my studies, is what are my competitors charging? What do you charge for your math class? Is it 10, 20, 30, I don't know, euro an hour? How does that work? I think that's also a way IXPs can kind of benchmark themselves. At the same time, we see in some metropolitan areas in Europe, more and more exchanges coming in the same space, in the same building sometimes. Are those exchanges really competing with each other? Do IXPs need to compete with each other? Who are IXPs competing with in general? Are they competing just with other IXPs or with some other form of transport? Maybe we can find some sense of an answer in that question.
So I think you addressed two topics, perhaps more, but the two that I thought of was with benchmarking, and definitely I agree. But it's also complicated because you don't know necessarily the cost structure of the neighboring exchanges in the region and what their relationships with their host facilities, et cetera, are, and so on. So it takes a bit of effort to do something like that, but it's definitely worthwhile and necessary. And then on the other, I would say that we're in the interconnection space, and our market is interconnection. Because I mean, if we set, for example, in Uganda, if we made our port prices ridiculously high, one thing that could happen is everybody would just peer in Kenya. Or the other is people would just work around us within the country through private interconnects or whatever other way they can do it. So we have pressures, for example, in a market sense. If we were to set up pricing, our pressures in terms of the upward boundary are limited not only by neighboring exchanges, but by other means for interconnection.
I think for Africa, it's a bit difficult because I think every country has been establishing an exchange point over the last 10, 15 years. And the exchange points themselves tend to be national in nature. It's unlike Europe, where 4 major exchange points tend to be more regional, and these days international as well. But you also get some others that are also regional within Europe, and so on and so forth. And they obviously reference off each other to grow their business. Africa is a bit different, because what the folks do in Ghana probably doesn't interest what the folks do in Burundi. However, the folks in Burundi might charge based on their own local costs that have no bearing on a regional global provider who comes into Burundi to peer and says, well, I can't pay $600 a month for a gig port. It doesn't make any sense to me for what, 10, 20 meg of traffic? You know what I mean? So I think there has to be some mechanism that is unique to Africa because of the way the exchange points are structured and built, that allows the operators to say, what is the value for my country? Because I don't think it's reasonable to assume all the exchange points in Africa are trying to grow outside of their country into their region across Africa. So maybe first thing is, what value do I bring to my nation? And am I trying to attract anybody else outside that? And how do I accommodate?
So are we really looking for a mechanism or for a logic here? So we established the Internet Exchange of Ghana doesn't compete with the Internet Exchange in Rwanda. They are really not operating in the same market. If you take Kyle's work that our market is interconnect. Interestingly, Andrew managing the NAP Africa is managing interconnect in general. Do you see, for someone wanting to push bits out of South Africa, what are the different ways? What are you really competing with at NAP Africa?
Well, I mean, as an exchange point, I think most exchange points know that there is a level of competition with carriers, because we all know the story about traffic hairpinning out of Africa back into Africa via Europe. I mean, there are a lot of people that made a lot of money off of that. So I mean, you could call it competition. But again, we go back to the point of that these are businesses, and you show me any industry where competition is a bad thing. We might operate differently to carriers, but it's the carriers that understand the way that the internet works. It's those carriers that are quick enough to adapt to it. I mean, if you have a look at Ecom, at the amount of peering that they do, you wouldn't in that case you wouldn't see Ecom as a competitor at all, because they're getting an advantage from peering. So yeah, looking at it from different views, it is competing, but it's competing in a good way, and that's always good.
I think maybe I'll help Andrew out a little bit. I'll give some perspective from a service provider and say a big portion of the reason we sell capacity into South Africa, for example, versus any other country, or versus Kenya, or versus Tanzania, or versus Nigeria, is because of co-location availability, but also because of the peering community. So inadvertently, that sort of makes NAP Africa a competitor to other places where those customers could have gone to deploy their traffic.
I'd just like to pipe in and talk about competition real quick, because I agree that it's a good thing, but I also want to note that it's just going to increase, right? Largely, I think a lot of the reasons why these African IXPs are national in their like where the Uganda IXP, there's the Kenya IXP, is because these countries were largely islands until the undersea cables came and cross-border infrastructure developed, And as cross-border and regional terrestrial internet infrastructure improves, we're going to be competing with each other in neighboring markets. I mean, we might not compete with Zambia right now, but as soon as the capacity through Tanzania starts to really open up, then we might. So I think there's going to be more of it, and I also agree that it will be a good thing. But I think what's important is that we acknowledge that it is it's a market.
Okay, I think we have two.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry, go
one
ahead.
thing. Just don't forget that there are technical limitations to how far you can compete, how far internet exchanges can compete with each other. I mean, I understand maybe in neighboring countries, but really, do you want to go back to that point where you're looping traffic through somebody else's country? So yes, there is competition, but I mean, technically, you're limited, or the ideal technical solution is to have it as close as possible and to keep it in the same space.
Okay, we have a number of questions from the floor. I think we had Nishal first. Do you still have a question? Okay, considering you're the professional troublemakers, you're allowed to.
Sorry, time's up.
Hi, my name is Nishal. I'm from Packet Clearing House. We're a small non-profit, well, not so small, I guess, that's been helping internet exchange points for more than 20 years. We've probably helped some of you. I'm curious why there is this constant push, and apologies if it was mentioned in the first part, I had a meeting, but why there's this constant push to want to regard an internet exchange point as a business. Because while there is clearly indication that internet exchange points can exist as a business, and you've met quite a few of them during the course of this week, there's no mandate that this must exist as a business. Let's go back to fundamentals. The fundamentals of an exchange point is to help the membership, the participants at the exchange point, get, well, cheaper peering, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be a for-profit thing. So I'm curious why, through at least the discussions I've heard too, there's always been this push to say, oh, but we need to do this and this and this and that. And that just was very curious to me.
I think it's about the mindset, right? And not necessarily that it should be for profit, for the need for sustainability and revenue and so on to sustain your activities at least.
So I think there's several ways to sustain your activities. I believe it was mentioned how the Seattle Internet Exchange Point runs, and although people point to it as being an anomaly in the exchange point environment, it actually isn't. There are lots of people that volunteer their time to get things done. I'm one of them, and there's other volunteers in the room as well. I'm sitting next to another one. There's Kyle right there. There are lots of organizations that are happy to volunteer equipment. I'm looking at the 6th page now, or Frank is, and there's a remarkable list of donations that have come through from it, from varied organizations over the years. So again, are we looking at a case, let me be blunt here, right? Are we looking at a case of envy? Are we looking at big organizations that are doing things and other people going, oh, we should do it like this because it looks cool, versus actually, this is about moving bits across the network to make things cheaper, better, faster for everybody else. So I guess the question I'm asking you is, are you thinking about adding value to the peering constituency, or to, as somebody said earlier on, the owners of the internet exchange point?
Yeah, I think the answer might be different for maybe different parts of Africa, because different networks have different goals. If you take us, for example, we not only want to see that the exchange point will be a going concern, i.e. sustainable, but we want to see actual value from it. We get a lot of offers, say in Europe, for example, to join small exchange points because they want us to be their members, and we don't see value in that. Until maybe another year or two as we keep testing, because we see value now in the ones that we have versus those extra costs for doing that. So for us, for example, sustainability is good, but we also have to see value. What is coming back to us? Because more than 2/3 of our traffic is peering. And I need to wake up or go to bed at night knowing that that would be the same or better the next day. But that might be different for others.
Sorry. Well, just quickly to recap the earlier discussion, it was about, I think Graham brought up the point of or asked a question about, what IXPs have sort of like died or stagnated from volunteer fatigue or loss of revenue, et cetera. And we had a large discussion that sort of illustrated that IXPs when they become sustainable and if you can sort of bring resources in like revenue, and you can have staff and so on, and you can give it what it needs to run, then it grows the value for the membership. Like the Uganda IXP, for example, suffered from fatigue for a number of years, and we stagnated. And then when we started to get more involvement, even still on a volunteer level, but bringing those people in, bringing new people in and getting some energy going in the exchange really helped bring up the number of peers, the traffic level, and the value for everybody at it. And now we're reaching another point where we have a hard time it becomes harder and harder over time as we grow to continue doing that on a free basis. And so now we need to sort of graduate into something where we can bring in revenue to, for example, fund people's time to continue bringing value.
What I would like to add is, as you're referring to the Six, and there's a Flix in Florida, which has a similar model. It's driven by people who likes to do this. As soon as they are losing interest because of job rotation or anything, it might go on. And this is the difficulty I would face if I want to, I'm a commercial network and I rely on sustainable or long-term relationships. And it's not for sure. If I have a contract with a partner, I can rely on. So that's my push. That's why I'm so into freelance isn't the solution for long-term sustainability.
All right, one more question for.
I just want to finish up with that one, is to say that when you say that you want to run an internet exchange point as a business, what you're implying is that it is something that is there to make profit. It is something that is there to extract money from somebody else. And it's like was mentioned, not necessarily run it as a business, but have that mindset. All right, and this is exactly the point. You cannot have a connect and forget model. That does not work. You need to be spending time with your members. You need to be in the market. You need to be pushing the exchange point. You need to be getting peers connected. You need to be, helping new members join, and you need to be helping people through the Afrinic sign-up process and that sort of thing. And if you're running on a volunteer basis, who is going to have enough time and energy to do that continuously?
So I think there's one in the room. Is it? Yes. Please, step forward. Oh.
Hi, Walt from Seattle Six Board. The Seattle Six has been founded from the beginning was donations of hardware. When you build up a new exchange, you don't necessarily have to put in the best and greatest hardware. The Seattle 6 was founded with like a 3-COM 4-port switch, 100 meg. Going back to the sustainability, Seattle 6 actually has a full-time employee, one, that we fund throughout the year. But again, all networks are not created equal, and neither are exchanges.
All right, I think we have a couple questions from the floor. We had Professor Meoli first. Is that it? Yeah, and then Michuki.
I think I have both a comment and a question. I think the first question you asked is who are IXPs competing with? And if I take it, the purpose of IXPs is to exchange traffic in a country, then the biggest competition is private peering with whoever it is. So because, for example, for us, my name is Meoli, I'm from Kenneth. We exchange just about 100 megabits at the IXP, but we exchange over 5G with private peering. So really, if you think about that as a competition, that is it. Now, why is private peering so popular compared to IXP? I don't know. It's, I think the next question, the question I have now is about how to measure value and how to measure a successful IXP. Do you measure the success of an IXP because it's moving 100 gig of traffic as compared to 5G, or do you measure it? Is there another way to measure? I have been thinking that actually the 100 megabit that we exchange with the IXP is very important for our community. And it's probably as valuable as the 5G that we exchange outside the IXP. So I would like to hear what your comments about that.
I think so. Thank you. Okay, thank you for bringing up. Private peering obviously is an alternative. For sure, if we're worried about IXP owners extracting value from an IXP and their competition is super cheap private peering, it seems difficult that there would be abuse there. Any reaction from the panel?
So yeah, I have some insight on why you exchange 100 megs at the exchange and then 5 gigs by private peering. Is because before I used to be at Wananchi Group, which is a telco before, and at the point where we were getting Akamai caches and a lot of CDNs coming into the country, because these were the first that came after many, many years. The exchange point at that time was not ready with 10 gig ports. It was also not at East Africa Data Center. So because of that, just because of the circumstances in time, the exchange point was not ready at that time to accommodate that. So a lot of that traffic ended up going via private peering, and it seems to have set precedents, I think, in Kenya at least. And then even when the exchange point becomes ready, unfortunately, you can't recover very quickly from such a step. It requires a conscious effort from the content providers, from the operators to actually change such a structure again and get all that traffic to the peering point. But I think generally what we've sort of seen here as well in terms of the second question, it's and I'll let the other guys from the exchange points comment more, but that's something I learned is that the number of peers is actually more relevant than necessarily the amount of traffic. And that makes sense to actually measure. And incidentally, that's also more money for the exchange points in general, is the number of peers is going out, like Andrea said, getting banks, getting, I think KXP is doing a lot of that now, getting Sport Pesa, the betting guys, the banks, anyone who's pushing local content, because that then drives the importance of the exchange and the value.
Question from the floor, Michuki.
So this sort of goes slightly back to what to Nishal's point. I think as an exchange point, sorry, Michuki Mwangi, let me wear my KXP hat for this particular one. So as an exchange point, if you start up and you don't have full-time staff and you're depending on volunteers, you get the first 5, 6 networks, the mobile operators who understand what's peering. So how do you get your betting company or your bank to understand that they actually need to come on peer and get their resources, et cetera, through volunteer time? It means someone needs to go and handhold and follow them and make sure that they take up the service. And that is pretty much what a salesperson does before you even hand them over to technical sales who will set them up. So the countries where they've not had this going on, it takes 1 year to get a new member. You sort of see 1 or 2 new members coming on board every year. In locations where you have someone doing this a lot more often, then you get a few more members joining the IXP. And that's how you grow the community or the ecosystem around the exchange point. So I still believe that there is a need for a balance where charging means that you're able to grow these resources that help build the ecosystem within that community. Thank you.
I think we have one more question from Frank Tispa, Frank the Tank.
Yes, hello, this is Frank from Dar es Salaam. I would like to ask Professor Meoli, and after him, anybody else who wants to answer. You've mentioned that KXP is kind of competing with PNIs. So for the situation to improve, would you like either KXP to lower the fees or increase the marketing budget?
It has nothing to do with fees. It's got nothing to do with fees. They can even increase the fees. The value of an IXP, actually what we pay is fairly reasonable. It can even be increased. Yeah. So the reason is, maybe the bigger reason, which we can discuss offline, is why we are doing private peering.
I think, yeah, like in KXP's case in particular, like I said, it was the readiness of the exchange point at the time. Like Andrea said, the biggest value in the exchange point is that growth, is that things are working, but the exchange point has to be working. So if the exchange point is not ready for the customers at that particular point, that's that's what caused this aspect. Similarly, if the other exchange points don't watch out, then they'll end up with similar situations, right, where the carriers, operators, other large carriers of traffic prefer to peer directly than do that through the exchange point.
So, I mean, so of the 75% traffic I said is all peering, about 45-48% of that is private. And the reasons are many. You know, you mentioned a lot of them. And, you know, they range from the other guy finds it easier to measure that way because he doesn't have net flow. So he won't move the port however much you try. Or you go to a POP and it takes your lawyer 6 months to fix up the contract with the exchange point, meaning you need to start get things going. Or a CDN comes into a facility and they need a high-speed port and the exchange point isn't ready and they start this and then it dies from there, never goes back. So there's all sorts of reasons why private peering happens, but the point is that all these exchange points you see up here and outside there is only a fraction of the traffic they could potentially be carrying. A lot of other traffic is actually, most of it is off the exchange points, off the switch, and that's just a fact of life. We can't change that. But for us, for example, for value, for us, it's margin performance. I mean, the value we get from the exchange point is just better margins on the prices that we charge. That means you can pass on more savings or do other things with that money. And for the performance you get out of the exchange point, that's the value that we see.
Yeah, well, I mean, private peering is still peering, right? So that's what this all is about. Just to Michuki, I mean, that's the whole point. You asked, how do you grow the exchange? How do you get more members? And that happens by speaking to your existing base, finding out who they need, who are they missing, who are they doing traffic to that they need to see at the exchange. A lot of our members have come up simply by speaking to existing members, getting the network information, getting data about how much traffic they're doing to CDNs, for example, and then taking that data as a motivation to that network or to that CDN and saying, these are the people that you can pick up over there. This is how much traffic you're doing to them. And, you know, it makes the conversation a hell of a lot easier. And, you know, again, that's the point of having, you know, some form of marketing and some form of business development, somebody that actually trying to grow an exchange constantly.
All right, we're getting close to our time quota. So we have one last question at the back. Sorry. Okay, 2 questions, but we start at the back and then we can start wrap up the kind of final remarks, see if there are some elements we can derive from the panel. I have a few, so I hope this was useful.
Okay, thank you. I'm January from Cameroon, Camix. I want to proceed in French. Donc, je vais continuer en français. Il faut justement que les interpréteurs justifient leur travail. OK, voilà, j'ai 2 préoccupations. OK, donc la première préoccupation, je vais d'abord apprécier, il y a une question sur le business model qui a été posée tout à l'heure, mais j'ai pas suivi la réponse parce que justement, je vais dire sur les meilleures pratiques. Il y a une question sur les meilleures pratiques, best practices. Je n'ai pas suivi la réponse du panel là-dessus parce que je suis effectivement intéressé à connaître les meilleures pratiques sur le business plan, sur les modèles de points d'échange. Donc, j'aimerais que le panel revienne dessus sur la question de bonnes pratiques pour que je rentre avec quelque chose de substantiel là-dessus. Une autre préoccupation, là, je m'adresse à tous les panélistes. Quel conseil pouvez-vous donner à quelqu'un à un pays qui est en train de mettre en place un point d'échange? Ça, je vais prendre notre cas. D'ici la fin de l'année, on va mettre en place notre point d'échange. Mais nous sommes en train de nous interroger sur le business plan. Quel est le plan d'affaires qu'on va déployer pour que effectivement le point d'échange soit opérationnel? L'infrastructure est déjà là, etc. D'ici la fin de l'année, on va se réunir pour lancer les opérations. Mais sur quel business plan? Donc, j'aimerais que en fait, vous qui avez l'expérience, une longue expérience là-dessus, si je peux rentrer avec un exemple de business plan, ça nous aiderait beaucoup sur le terrain.
Okay.
Merci.
So, merci. Two questions. One, best practice. I think we have answered this already. Kyle pointed to a few best practices from the Internet Government Forum, but in general, the panel agrees that there is no such thing as general best practices for Internet exchanges. Every case are different, and it's very difficult to generalize. And then the second question is, do the panelist members have advice to give to a nascent exchange starting to grow, how to do their planning, and yeah, any advice for a starting exchange?
So it has a lot of aspects to look into if you wanted to grow. Firstly, you need randomly do a market research. This is what basically Walt Walney from HeNet explained. When he go entering markets, he's looking at how many networks, how many ASNs, what is the cost, what is the infrastructure basically, data centers, power stability, availability, easiness of access, all these things that is there from a starting point. And if I'm already on an operational phase and I'm stalling a little and finding new peers, it's the thing Andrew mentioned, that talk to your peers to get recommendation or introductions. Basically look on other exchanges, what kind of customers sitting there that are not on my exchange. Yeah, all these kind of things. So running around with very open eyes, collect the data, and then take 10% as the must wins, 50% should come, and 100 would be Wonderland.
Kyle from the Uganda IXP, I would also strongly recommend that you engage with the African IXP Association via its mailing list. That's a continual form of support that you can receive from your neighbors in the region.
So I have a radical proposal. How about for this new exchange point that is going to be set up, we don't follow the normal route in terms of get community support from Nisha, Michuki, ISOC and stuff. And instead, why don't we treat it as a startup and talk to NAP Africa and make it a proper venture from day zero, and see what comes out in the next 5 years or so. So invest in it like a startup, structure it like a proper enterprise, and then let's see what happens. It's a good experiment to kind of then compare the community exchanges versus the enterprise exchanges.
Okay, so now a lot of advice, different routes to take. I think we're running out. Okay. No, we're running out of time. So Michuki, do we have time for one more question, especially a question from Andrew? Okay, I guess one more then.
Yeah, not so much a question. It's just something that was being talked about slightly earlier that I wanted to add something to. Where Frank asked about KIXP and PNIs. Something that we have found, which is a very large misconception, is that the moment that you leave the root servers, people go, why'd you leave the exchange? And they assume that if you aren't on the root server, you aren't at the exchange, no matter how many times you tell them. And that then leads to PNIs. And we found this in several cases. We are still at the KIXP exchange, and we always will be. We fully support it. We prefer our traffic over the fabric. However, we will not be on the root servers because of a variety of reasons. And so if you want to avoid the PNIs, you also need to correct that misconception that exists among a lot of providers that being at an exchange means being on a root server, because it's not the case. And a number of times I've been asked, why did we leave KIXP? Well, we didn't. We're still there. So that's just something that I wanted to add, because it is something that needs to be corrected, and the IXPs need to make sure people understand that.
Very true, very correct. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Very good point. We also saw exactly the same thing. We've gotten to the point where people think that the root server is the exchange point. So what we've done now is we've, in our introduction documents to new peers, we specifically explain the difference between what the root server is and what the exchange point is, just to get past that same problem.
All right. Wrapping up the different interventions we had. So to derive the value of various exchanges, we had some hints of methods. It seemed that the panel agreed that growing the community is in fine what drives the value of exchanges, driving the amount of numbers and the growth. It seems that eventually the main driver for moving to have a sustainable model is to have a structure that allows to recover its cost. And when costs move, especially in a competitive environment where you compete with transit, private peering, and so on, you need to adjust your price to that. So that gives another indication of value. And then finally, the fact that at the end of the day, an exchange point is layer 2 fabric plus a root server. And so you can do layer 2 interconnect or layer 3 interconnect in various different ways, not necessarily on the exchange. Final remarks from the panelists.
Okay. Yeah. So back to the value of an IXP. I think the best way to describe it is as an enabler. All right. So you can imagine that if you're allowing networks to move a lot of traffic over your IXP, you're probably saving them a lot of money, and that kind of money could be used to develop their business further. I mean, you go and have a look at what the mobile players are doing in a lot of African countries, is that once they have a short and easy path to a specific service, they start zero rating that service on certain packages, so it allows them to differentiate their product line and also to be more innovative. In closing, in summary, and I think I've said this before, but I just want to highlight the point that, an internet exchange points it needs to be a long-term thing. And from my own personal point of view, an exchange point should always be about the good of the internet. It is an enabler. It is one of the things that leads to and drives internet and interconnection and that sort of thing. And again, we all understand that good internet is going to lead to a lot more business in other areas.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what we discussed regarding competition from carriers and something, I think that's something, again, to watch for and also be wary about. I think as exchange points, continuously from both content providers, from carriers, exchange points still need to be nurtured and so on. The exchange points on their side need to obviously develop business models and run in ways that suit them and provide for their customers. But I think there also needs to be conscious effort to not get off the exchange point and instead to enable the exchange point all the time, especially from carriers and content providers. As they're growing bigger and bigger, which is good for the content, I think we need to also keep the exchange points growing as well at the same time along with us.
So my last comments will basically go for the African exchanges that are coming up new, or those who have come and are not so big. I think we need to carve a niche for ourselves. What I've identified is that content is a problem, and these are main local content. So we need to find a way of bringing up local content in our respective countries. And once we have that, we can find better means of people connecting and having better value at our exchanges.
Yeah, I think just regarding value and bringing it back to our relatively small African IXP perspective in Uganda, we know that we have value because we see consistent growth in terms of new peers and traffic. But aside from the obvious benefits like lower costs and improved performance and reliability and such, we have a hard time determining anything more specific because we have a limited ability to assess the nature of the activity that occurs on our exchange. like data analysis and in-depth customer engagement takes resources like time, which we just don't currently have. And so hence, I guess, also bringing it back to the discussion about the need for sustainable models. And I'd also like to say thanks to everybody. I've really learned from this discussion, so it's been good.
As a service provider, I think I would say let's treat the exchange points as critical infrastructure, not to the whole world, but just to your business, and appreciate the value they give your business. And I think let's get Africa away from the mindset of expecting exchange points to be free.
Okay. So my final remarks is, yes, there are measures of success. You only have to put them on the list, like number of ports, origin of ASNs, coverage of your region. So you have be a bit creative on this. Secondly, my value to my customers, basically, I don't have members, we have customers, is the long tail. So the small ISPs and ASNs that are around my region I'm covering. And last but not least, price always shows value.
Fair enough. Thanks to panelists. I'll add a couple of words, not in my quality of moderator, but maybe just as the peering manager for Google. I thought it would be an interesting perspective also to give on some of the topics. I think clearly when you have the ability to peer and when you have an infrastructure in one location, then yeah, most definitely the local exchange is competing with cross connects for peering and delivering bits. So in that sense, I'm happy to report that in Frankfurt, for example, DGX is one big gigantic cross connects that I guess we're happy to pay for, because it's so much simpler than having hundreds and thousands of ports and cross connects to connect to plenty of networks. In some of the more starting markets on the continent, the situation may be a bit different, and the value we see and why we would support internet exchange points with hardware donations or caching appliances is precisely the value of growing the community. What I hope Emmanuel or Kyle will be able to achieve by growing their exchange is exactly that, putting all of those businesses online, all of those ISPs online, not necessarily to carry hundreds of gigs of traffic, but to have more businesses online, which is at the end of the day what drives the business of all internet companies, Google included. So I hope you enjoyed the panel. Thanks everybody, and I think we are now able to enjoy a coffee break. Is it? Yes. But we have 1 minute for a comment from Michuki, so I'll leave the floor.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very interesting discussion. Again, to the panel and the moderator, thank you very much once again. So now we would like to recognize our speakers. We haven't given anything to our speakers since morning. So I'll start with the ones who are here, and then I'll call up the others in a minute. So let's go with Andrew.